The musicians had just begun the third set when Frances Holt went looking for her betrothed, and she found him in the small green anteroom off the long gallery, where the candlelight was lower and the noise of the ballroom came muffled through the wall. She had not meant to find anything. She had come away from the dancing because the heat of the rooms had made her head ache, and because she wished, for one quiet moment before the supper was called, to stand somewhere she could hear her own thoughts. She had not been looking for him at all. That was the thing she would turn over afterward, in the months and the years that followed, that she had not gone seeking proof of anything, that she had stumbled upon it the way a person stumbles in the dark upon the one piece of furniture that has been moved. Lucia was standing very close to him. That was all, at first, only that her sister was standing very close to the Duke of Dunmere, closer than the figures of any dance required, her gloved hand resting on the dark sleeve of his coat with a familiarity that did not belong to a woman speaking to her sister's intended. Lucia's head was tipped up. She was laughing, or pretending to laugh, her white throat bare and lovely in the candlelight, and Oliver Carew was looking down at her with an expression Frances had never once been given in the whole course of their courtship, startled and caught and undefended, the face of a man who has been led somewhere he half wished to go and is only now understanding the size of it. He turned and saw her. She would remember his face. Not Lucia's face she did not look at, then or ever, with any great attention, having learned long ago what was written there, and finding no profit in reading it twice. But his face, in the half-second before he composed it, told her everything she had spent the autumn refusing to believe. It was not the face of a man surprised by an accusation. It was the face of a man surprised by a witness. There is a difference, and Frances, who had always been the observant one, the one who saw, knew the difference at once and felt it go into her like cold water into the lungs. She did not scream. She did not make a scene. Later, people who had not been there would assume that she must have wept, or struck him, or said some cutting thing the story required, and she would let them assume it, because the truth was harder to explain and belonged to no one but herself. The truth was that she looked at him for one long moment, long enough for him to begin to say her name, Frances, in a voice already reaching for an explanation, and then she turned, without a word, and walked back through the doorway into the ballroom. She did not hurry. That was the only thing she gave herself, in that moment, the small, fierce gift of not hurrying. She moved through the bright, crowded room at the pace of a woman with somewhere ordinary to be, past the matrons in their turbans and the great branched candelabra dripping their soft wax onto the silver trays beneath, and she found a footman and asked him, in a voice that did not shake, because she would not permit it, to have her wrap brought and her father's carriage called. The footman bowed and went. She stood by the wall and waited, and looked at the dancing and thought, with a strange floating clarity that comes in the worst moments, how beautiful it all was, and how little of it had ever been hers. He did not come after her. That was the part she could not have predicted and would think of often. She had braced herself, standing by the wall, for the sound of his step behind her, for the hand on her arm, for the low, urgent voice asking her to wait, to let him explain. And it did not come. By the time he had disentangled himself from Lucia and the small green room and his own astonishment, the footman had returned with her wrap, and Frances Holt had drawn it about her shoulders and gone out through the great doors into the cold spring night, and she was simply gone. He told her, years afterward, that he had stood in the middle of the floor turning his head this way and that, certain she must still be in the room, and had not understood, until he stood in the empty hall with the doors open on the dark, that some things, once let go, do not wait to be reached for. She did not weep in the carriage. She sat very upright in the cold and watched the lamps of the great houses go by, and somewhere between Grosvenor Square and her father's modest house, in a less fashionable street, she made the first of the decisions that would make the rest of her life. She would not contest it. She would not demand the engagement enforced, the settlements honored, the Duke held to his word. She would not fight Lucia for him across the bright field of the season, becoming in the process something narrow and watchful and sharp. She had watched that contest her whole life, in her own house, because Lucia had been competing with her since they were children, for the better, seat, the prettier ribbon, the visitor's attention, and Lucia always won, because Lucia wanted it more nakedly, and Frances had learned that the only way to keep any part of herself intact was to decline the game. She declined it now. She would not win him. She did not, she discovered somewhat to her own surprise, even want to. What she felt was not in the end the loss of him. She had not loved him as she had once thought she might. She had loved the idea of being chosen, the warmth of his attention when it came, the genuine moments, and there had been genuine moments. She did not lie to herself about that, when he had spoken to her as though her mind were a thing he wished to know. She had believed there was something real between them. She thought now that there had been on her side, and that on his side had there been a man too weak to know his own heart, and a younger sister very deliberate about supplying him with another one. Oliver Carew was not a villain. She knew that even in the cold of the carriage, and it was perhaps the hardest thing of all to know, because a villain could have been hated cleanly. He was only weak at the wrong moment, with a woman who had chosen the moment with care. She told her father the next morning that she had decided she did not wish to marry the Duke of Dunmere, and that she would be obliged if no questions were asked. Sir, her father was not, and the family was a moderate one, of good name and modest means, and her father, a mild and somewhat baffled man who had never understood either of his daughters and had given up trying, looked at her pale, composed face and the set of her mouth and asked no questions. Lucia by then had not come home. Frances did not ask where she was. She knew. It was 3 weeks later, in the gray light of an early morning, that Frances understood she was carrying the Duke's child. She did not know it with certainty for some time, and when the certainty came, it did not frighten her as she might have expected. She sat with it for several days, alone, as she had sat with every important thing in her life, and she made her plans the way she made all her plans, quietly, completely, and without consulting anyone whose opinion she did not value. She wrote to Mrs. Edith Crane, a widowed cousin of her late mother's, a woman of perhaps 60 who lived alone in a small stone house in a quiet county a long way from London, and who had been kind to Frances in a brisk, unsentimental way during the one summer Frances had spent there as a girl. She did not tell her cousin everything in the letter. She told her enough. Mrs. Crane, who had buried a husband and 3 hopes of children, and had a great deal of unused tenderness and a fierce private contempt for the cruelties of polite society, wrote back by return of post and told her to come at once, and to come as Mrs. Holt, a young widow, and to let the neighborhood believe whatever was kindest. So Frances vanished. She told her father only that she was going to stay with Cousin Edith for her health, which was true enough, and that she did not know when she would return, which was truer. She did not write to the Duke. She did not petition for anything, not money, not acknowledgement, not the marriage that any other woman in her position might have felt entitled to demand at the point of her vanished honor. She had no legal claim on him. She had been only engaged, and an engagement, however solemn, is not a marriage, and a child got upon an unmarried woman has no name in the eyes of the law but the bare hard fact of its own existence. She knew all of this. She walked into it with her eyes open, the way her mother had taught her to walk into everything, and she did not look back at the bright world she was leaving, because she had decided that looking back was a luxury she could not afford, and a habit she did not intend to form. The county was beautiful in a plain way the season had never shown her. There were no candelabra there, and no one who had ever heard the name Dunmere, only a small gray house with a garden gone half to seed, and a cousin who fed her too much and asked her nothing and sat with her in the evenings by a fire that smelled of apple wood. She grew large and slow through the autumn, and walked every day along the lane between the hedgerows with her hand resting on the curve of herself, and found somewhat to her own astonishment that she was not unhappy. She had braced for misery the way she had braced for his step behind her at the ball. What came instead was quieter and far more surprising, a kind of expansion, a sense of having been let out of a small bright cage into a larger and plainer freedom. She had spent her whole life being the steady one, the one who declined the contest and kept herself intact, and here, with no one watching, she discovered what was underneath all that careful composure. It turned out to be a deep and patient capacity for love, and it had only been waiting for something to spend itself upon. The child was born in the cold dark of a January night, with Mrs. Crane and a sensible local midwife in attendance and the applewood fire burning high. It was a boy. He was dark, as the Duke was dark, with a great deal of black hair, the midwife exclaimed over, and when he opened his eyes, some weeks later, they were the Duke's eyes exactly. That particular dark gray Frances had once thought she would spend her life looking into across a breakfast table. She had thought she might mind that. She did not. She looked into her son's eyes and felt only that they were his own, entirely his own, and that whatever they had borrowed from his father, they had made into something new and wholly theirs. She named him George. It was a plain, solid, unremarkable name, a name 100,000 English boys carried, a name that pointed at no one and asked nothing of the world. She did not name him after his father. She had thought about it and decided against it with the same quiet completeness she brought to all her decisions. The boy would have enough of his father in his face. He did not need it in his name as well. He would be George Holt and he would be hers, and the world could make of that what it chose. 2 years passed in the small gray house, and they were good years. George grew sturdy and dark and serious, with sudden gusts of laughter that took his whole small body. He learned to walk in the half-wheeled garden and to name the apple trees and to follow Mrs. Crane about the kitchen, demanding to stir things. Frances taught him his letters out of an old primer and sang to him the songs her mother had sung and oversaw, through a man named Rowe who managed the small estate that came with the house, the modest business of the land. For Mrs. Crane had grown too old for it and was glad to hand it over, and Frances found she had a head for it that no one had ever thought to look for in her. She did not manage it with her own hands. She was a gentlewoman still, whatever the neighborhood believed, and such things were done through Rowe, who was honest and slow and devoted to her within a fortnight of her arrival. But she understood it. She read the accounts and walked the fields and knew the tenants' names, and found in the steady work of it the same expansion she had found in everything since she walked out of the ballroom. The sense of being, for the first time, the author of her own days. She did not think of the Duke often. When she did, it was without bitterness, which surprised her, the way one thinks of a country one has left and does not intend to return to, wondering idly whether he had married Lucia after all, whether the dowager had got the daughter-in-law she had so plainly preferred. She did not know that he had married no one. She did not know that he had begun, some 6 months after she left, to look for her, quietly at first, then with a growing and undignified desperation, putting men on the roads and the coaching inns, learning that she had taken her mother's cousin's name, and then losing even that thread twice over. She did not know the search had taken him 18 months and very nearly broken his health, or that his mother had told him, more than once and with gentle implacability, that he was making a spectacle of himself over a girl who had jilted him. She knew only her son and her garden and the turning of the year, and she had made her peace, and she thought the peace would hold. It was a bright afternoon in early summer when the Duke of Dunmere found her. She was in the front room with the windows open, the warm gold light lying across the floor in long bars, and George was beside her on the worn rug building something out of wooden blocks and narrating it to himself in the low, absorbed monologue of a small boy at serious work. Frances was mending. She heard the gate and the step on the path and thought it was Rowe and did not look up at once. When she did, when she rose, the mending sliding from her lap, and went to the open door, she saw a man standing at the foot of the path, travel-dusty, his hat in his hands. His dark hair grayed a little at the temples in a way it had not been 2 years before, and his face entirely undefended, the face she had seen once across a green anteroom and not since. He was not looking at her. He was looking past her, through the open door, at the small dark-haired boy on the rug who had paused in his building to stare with grave curiosity at the stranger. Frances watched the recognition go into him, saw him understand, in the space of a breath, what he was looking at, whose jaw that was, whose dark gray eyes were turned up at him in frank toddler appraisal. She saw a man receive, all at once and without any defense prepared, the whole weight of what he had lost and what had been made in his absence. He made a small sound. His hand, holding the hat, tightened until the brim crushed. "Frances," he said, and then he did not seem able to say anything else. She did not faint or weep or fly at him. She had had 2 years to prepare for this moment, and the preparation held. She stepped out onto the path and drew the door half closed behind her, putting herself between the Duke and her son, and said, in a voice perfectly level, "Your Grace, you have had a long journey, I think. You had better not stand in the road." It was not forgiveness. It was only courtesy, the deep ingrained courtesy of her kind, but he took it as though she had offered him water in a desert, and his composure broke entirely, and he said her name again and a great many other things, that he had searched for her for 2 years, that he had never married, that he had been a fool and worse than a fool, that if he had known of the child he would have moved heaven and earth. And Francis let him say them, standing on the path in the gold light, and felt them fall through the air around her without quite touching her. "You did not know," she agreed, when he had run out of words. "I took some care that you should not. That was my choice to make, and I made it, and I do not regret it." She looked at him and saw how much older he was, and how the easy remoteness she had once mistaken for distinction was burned away to something rawer and more human. "His name is George," she said. "He is 2 years and 5 months old. He is a serious child and a kind one, and he has never in his life lacked for anything I could give him, and I could give him a great deal more than anyone ever supposed. I tell you this so you understand he is not a thing you have found. He is a person who has been alive and growing all this while, whether you knew of him or not." "I do understand it," the Duke said. "I am beginning to." "Then we may speak," she said, "but not today, and not on the road, and not where he can hear us. Come tomorrow. Come at 11. Mrs. Crane will give you tea, and you may meet your son properly, and we will speak of what is to be done. But you will do nothing, Your Grace, nothing at all, that he does not choose and that I do not agree to. Is that understood between us?" "It is understood," he said. He came the next day at 11, and the day after that, and many days after, through the long bright summer. He took rooms at the inn in the market town and rode out each morning, and he sat on the worn rug and built towers of blocks for George to knock down, clumsily at first, and then with a real and growing tenderness, and he learned his son the slow, honest way, which is the only way anyone is ever learned. Frances watched. She did not soften quickly. She had not survived by softening quickly, but she saw the thing in him she had once believed was there and had spent 2 years doubting. The genuine article, the man who had spoken to her as though he wished to know her mind, turned now upon the boy with a humility the careless young Duke of the ballroom could never have managed. He was being made into something. She had been made into something by the worst morning of her life. She recognized the process when she saw it working on another. What he wanted was plain enough, and he was honest about it from the first. He wished to acknowledge George as his son, to make the boy legitimate so far as the law allowed, and to marry Frances. He wished, he said, with a directness that was new in him, to spend the remainder of his life undoing as much of his folly as could be undone. And Frances, who might have leapt at any of these things had she been a more frightened woman, was not ready to give them to him merely because he had found her and was sorry. She had built a life, a small life and a quiet one, but wholly hers, the first thing that had ever been wholly hers, and to walk back into his world was to walk back into the great machine of rank and expectation that had nearly devoured her once before. And there was the matter of his mother. "Your mother preferred my sister," Frances said to him one afternoon, plainly when the matter of marriage had been raised once too gently. "She made no secret of it during the engagement. I was the wrong daughter to her from the first. Too quiet, too plain, too little inclined to be grateful. If I marry you, Your Grace, I marry her also, and I marry the world she commands, and I have a son to think of who will sit in the House of Lords one day if I am not careful, a great deal more vulnerable than any peer ought to be if the law is not satisfied first and the family second. I will not bring him into a house where he is a problem to be managed. I have seen how your mother manages problems. She does it very gently and very thoroughly, and you do not always see the body fall." The Duke was silent for a while. Then he said, "She did prefer your sister. You are right in that, and I did not marry her, nor will I. And when she pressed me to let you go, I came near to telling her things between a mother and a son that cannot be unsaid. She is formidable, my mother. She has managed people for 40 years, and she is very good at it. but she has never once in those 40 years been told no by the only person whose no she would have to hear. That is a thing I have not done. I think it is the thing, more than any other, that made me the man you found in that anteroom, a man who had never refused his mother anything and so had never learned to refuse himself. Frances looked at him for a long moment. It was, she thought, the truest thing he had ever said to her, and the most useful, and she filed it away with the other things she knew about him, the genuine moments and the weak ones, and she did not give him an answer that day. But she thought, walking in the garden that evening with George's hand in hers, that a man who could say such a thing about himself might also, in time, learn to act upon it. And she found that she wished to see whether he would. The matter could not be settled in the country. The question of George's legitimacy was a legal one, requiring lawyers and documents and the kind of quiet arrangement that great families make to fold an inconvenient child into the line of succession. And such things were managed in London, where the family's interest lay. And so at the end of the summer Frances agreed, for her son's sake and not for the Duke's, to come up to town. She came as herself this time, as Frances Holt with no false widowhood to hide behind, and took the storm of it on her own straight back. The whispers, the cut direct from women who had once courted her, the long delicious scandal of the jilted girl returned with the Duke's bastard in tow. She had decided, in the cold of a carriage 2 years before, that she would not perform distress for the entertainment of people who had come to watch, and she did not perform it now. She met every gaze levelly, and said little, and gave the gossips nothing to feed on but her own unbreakable calm, which is the one thing gossip cannot digest. The Dowager Duchess of Dunmere received her in the great drawing-room of the family's town house on an afternoon in October, with the lawyer's work nearly done and the marriage spoken of as a settled thing, and she did so with a graciousness so perfect and so cold that Frances understood within a minute exactly what she was dealing with. The Dowager did not shriek. She did not insult. She was a small, upright, beautifully dressed woman of near 70, with her son's dark gray eyes gone pale with age, and she operated as she had for 40 years, not through assault but through the management of other people's assumptions. She poured the tea herself. She admired Frances's gown in a way that made it clear she had priced it. She spoke of the marriage as a great kindness on the family's part, a generous regularizing of an unfortunate situation, and of George. She did not say George. She said the child as a matter that would be quietly provided for and need not, she was sure, intrude upon anyone's notice more than was strictly necessary. She built, sentence by gentle sentence, a version of events in which Frances was a fortunate young woman being rescued from her own indiscretion by a family of great forbearance, and she built it so smoothly that a less certain woman might have found herself nodding along to her own diminishment before she quite knew it was happening. The Duke was in the room. He had been silent, standing by the window, in the old way, the remote way, the way of a man who had spent his whole life letting his mother arrange the air of a room around them both. "Madam," Frances said, when the Dowager had finished and set down her own cup with a small decisive click, "you are mistaken in nearly everything you have said, and I think you know it, and I think you have said it anyway because you have found, over a long life, that a thing said gently and often enough becomes true in the minds of those too comfortable to examine it. I will not be rescued. I have not been in want of rescue at any point in the last 2 years, having managed quite well without the forbearance of this family or any other. And the child has a name. It is George. He is your grandson. He has your son's eyes, which I imagine you have noticed, since you notice everything. You may provide for him quietly if it pleases you to do so, but you will not provide for him in a corner, and you will not speak of him to me as though he were a stain to be got out of the linen. I've come to town for his sake, and for no other reason on this earth, and I will marry your son, if I marry him, on terms that protect my boy and not your comfort. Those are the only terms I will hear." There was a silence. The Dowager's pale eyes did not waver. Her own art forbade her any show of the thing she felt. She drew breath to answer. Frances saw it, the small intake, the gentle, implacable machine engaging, and into that breath, before a word of it could come, the Duke of Dunmere said, quietly, from his place by the window, "Frances," that was all, only her name. He did not raise his voice, he made no speech. He crossed no room in 3 strides as a man in a play might have done. He simply said her name into the small space before his mother could speak, and then he turned to the dowager and said, in the same quiet voice, "Let her finish, mother, and then let her be. She is going to be my wife, and the boy's going to be my heir, and I will not have either of them managed, not by you, not by anyone, not ever again." It was the first time in his life Francis understood, watching the dowager's face, that he had ever told his mother no. She saw the knowledge pass through the older woman like a current, the recognition that the one person whose refusal she had never had to weather had finally learned to weather her. The dowager was far too skilled to show defeat. She inclined her head a fraction, said something gracious and meaningless, and the moment closed over smooth as water. But it was done. They all 3 knew it was done. The machine had been told no by the only voice that could stop it, and a machine that has been stopped once can be stopped again. They were married before the year was out, quietly, in a small church and not a great one, at Francis's insistence, with George present in his best coat and very serious about the whole proceeding. The boy was made legitimate so far as the careful machinery of the law could contrive it, recognized, named, secured in his place. And the consequence to Lucia Holt, for there was one, though Francis neither sought it nor savored it, came about not through any act of revenge, but through the simple withdrawal of the thing she had angled for. Lucia had wagered her reputation on becoming the Duchess of Dunmere, had let it be known she expected it, and when the Duke married his jilted bride instead, and the family's patronage closed quietly against the younger Holt sister, Lucia found the doors that had stood open to her drifting shut, one by one, with no hand visible upon them. She married in time a man of much smaller fortune and no particular kindness, and she did not prosper, and Francis, who heard of it, felt neither triumph nor pity, but only the distant, impersonal interest of a woman regarding a country she had left. She did not gloat. She had never needed to. The art she had practiced on the worst night of her life had never had anything to do with winning. It was several years on a bright afternoon at Dunmere, that Francis stood in the long hall and watched her son run the length of it at full pelt, dark and sturdy and shouting, 6 years old now, and the undisputed terror of the spaniels, his boots loud on the old stone. There was a second child by then, a small fair girl asleep upstairs who had her mother's coloring and, the household swore, her mother's unnerving way of looking at a person as though she had already worked out what they were going to say. The dowager was at Dunmere too that summer. She came less than she once had, and stayed in her own apartments more, and had grown, if not soft, then at least quiet, having discovered that a household run by Francis had no use for the management she had spent her life perfecting. She had chosen the sidelining in the end, or she had been given the choice and had taken the only part of it that left her any dignity. Either way, she sat in the sun by the long windows and let George climb on her, and said nothing, managing it all, and Francis, watching, thought that even the most formidable people are mostly tired underneath and grateful in the end for an excuse to set the burden down. Francis thought sometimes of the ball, of the green anteroom in the candlelight and her sister's hand on his sleeve, of the long moment she had looked at him and the longer one in which she had walked away, of the cold spring night and the wrap drawn round her shoulders and the carriage door closing on the bright world she was leaving. She thought of how certain she had been that night that her life was ending, and of how completely wrong she had been. For it was not the ending of anything. It was the one true beginning she had ever been given. The door she had not known was a door, and she had walked through it the only way she knew how, quietly, completely, and without looking back, into a self she would never otherwise have found. She could not, when she was honest with herself in the late evenings by the fire, quite bring herself to regret it. The man she had married had been burned into something better, as she had, and so had they made of the wreck of that night a thing neither of them could have made whole. She would not have chosen the road, but she would not, now, give back where it had brought her. There is a particular kind of strength that looks from the outside like surrender. It walks out of the bright room without a word. It asks for its wrap. It declines the contest the world is so certain it must enter, and the world, watching, calls it weakness or pride or a broken heart fled into hiding, and is wrong every time about all of it. For the woman who walks away is not running from the fight. She is declining to fight on ground that was chosen for her by people who profit from her struggling over a prize that was never worth the having. She is keeping the one thing that cannot be taken from a person except by their own consent, which is the quiet ownership of her own soul. And out of that small saved thing, in the plain and unwatched years that follow, she builds a life so entirely her own that when the world comes looking for her again, travel dusty, hat in hand, sorry at last, it finds her already whole, already enough, with a dark-haired child at her knee and nothing left to ask of anyone. Frances Holt walked out of a ballroom into the worst night of her life and made of it the truest one, and she was right to go and right to wait, and right, in the end, to let him find her on her own ground and her own terms and not a moment before. These stories live here, gathered out of the long century of candlelit rooms and quiet women who declined to make a scene, set down again for anyone who has ever had to walk away in order to keep themselves whole. They arrive here like a door one did not know was a door, opening at last onto the rest of a life whenever they are ready.